starting this thing off, give us a little bit about why you do what you do and what exactly is it that you do? How would you describe it?
Sure. I mean, I do. Maybe I'll start with what I do.
Yeah.
Uh, I write a lot, and I teach. I lead retreats. Uh, Predominantly, I write and teach about meditation and mystical philosophy, and I do that because it's what I'm the most in love with and what I care about the most. So, just very brief overview of my history. I was an engineer, then I was a school teacher. I got involved with a spiritual community that I lived in for 20 years. And it was a very practice intensive community. I had profound and deep spiritual experiences, mainly as a result of that much practice. And that community came to an end about 8 years ago or so. And at that point, I was a very prominent member of the community, and we were a global organization. And initially, I was unsure what I wanted to do, but fairly quickly, I realized that sharing the potential for spiritual freedom and mystical illumination with other people is the only thing I'm really interested in doing. So it became the obvious thing to do, and I've been doing that ever since. I was doing it before inside a community. I've been doing it on my own ever since. So I would say that's why I do it.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah, I mean that's a very honorable endeavor.
Yeah, I mean it doesn't. It just feels natural to me.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like I can't imagine anything else I'd want to do, and mainly I just feel grateful that I'm able to do what I love the most, and earn a living doing it. I don't need that much, but as long as I can keep earning a living doing what I love, then I'm doing what I love. What do I care about anything else?
Yeah. Yeah, you're earning a monetary living, but I would also probably say that you're earning your own freedom. Like you're granting other people a sense of liberation, or at least guiding them to liberation. I would also say maybe you could agree it's granting you a sense of liberation, right? Like
Definitely.
it's a win-win for everybody.
Oh, it's the greatest possible life. I spend time with exactly the kind of people I love to be with, people who are spiritually inspired and interested. I just finished a 5-day retreat yesterday,
Wow.
which had in person, it had 12 participants, 10 in person. And, there's no better way to spend your time than with a group of people who are all as passionate as you are about spiritual matters. So definitely it's my freedom, it's my joy, it's the sharing, both in written form and in teaching, has just become just a very important part of my own spiritual path, and it's the means for my own growth and development at this point.
Mm. So how would you describe to somebody that doesn't know any better what exactly you write about, what exactly you speak about, what these retreats are for? How would you describe that to somebody that has never been exposed to your work?
Sure. Well, I would say, the way that I look at it, spiritual growth is a two-step, has two phases. And the first phase is spiritual freedom. And what that means is we're all born, into a human circumstance. We're all born into a life. We're born into a personality, or it develops. Let me change how I want to say this. People who come to me have woken up, right? They're awake. And they may be They may be only a little awake, or they may not even know they're awake. They may be dramatically awake, but they're awake, which means, to me, very simply, awake means that moment where you realize there's more to life than what you've been told.
Mm.
When suddenly the prescription for a happy life that you absorbed from your culture no longer feels like enough, because you've seen in some form or another that there's more is possible than that.
Mm.
And so when that happens, you wake up in the middle of a life. And it's a life that you created before you were awake.
Huh.
And so the first thing we need to do is liberate ourselves, not necessarily from the circumstances of our life. Nobody knows what might need to change in manifestation, but we need to liberate ourselves from the habits and patterns of thinking and feeling that developed in that life. So we all find ourselves embedded in habitual ways of thinking and feeling and perceiving, and embedded in assumptions about who we are and what's possible for us and what reality is, that now we're starting to question. And so the first thing we need to do is liberate ourselves from all of that, all of the machinery of mind.
Yeah.
And a great deal of spiritual work is all about just letting go of the habitual patterns of mind and finding this dramatic freedom where one realizes all of that mind stuff is just mind stuff. You know, all of those thoughts, even the ones that are you thinking about yourself, are just recorded thought patterns. They aren't necessarily true. And so you can really step back and experience a dramatic sense of freedom from all of those patterns, all of that conditioning of your life. You know, and that's a necessary step, you could say. That might be, you know, that's amazing. Anyone who experiences that degree of freedom, you don't necessarily need anything at that point, because you're free. You're free to now live in a completely different way. But you also might be driven to explore higher potentials, higher possibilities, sort of mystical realms of being that do exist beyond our normal, ordinary sense of reality. And for those people who feel compelled by that, what they want to use that foundation of freedom for is then to embark on a journey into non-ordinary realms of being, non-ordinary realms of experience. And I feel deeply compelled to explore non-ordinary realms. And a lot of the people that I find, want to work with me are also compelled. So I would say those two things. The first element being that real dramatic liberation from the patterning of the mind, which I think everybody would love. You know, there's nobody that doesn't feel like their mind is driving them crazy sometimes.
Yeah.
And then the mystical pursuit, which is, probably a smaller number of people would feel compelled to explore that, but those who do are quite compelled by it.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's great. So it's like the first step is realizing that there's more than meets the eye, more than
Yes.
what we've been told, at least. And then the second step is, I guess, going with that wavelength of the divine mystery that we find ourselves in. And
Mm-hmm.
staying with that wonder and curiosity. But first it starts with gaining a sense of sovereignty, right? At least like you feel like, oh wait, I don't have to abide by, X or Y idea of who I thought I was or who I was told. It's really about paving your own way in life, right? Like I
Right.
guess that's the essence of freedom. That's why we call it liberation. It's
Right.
liberation from the stories and from the conditionings of the past, and then thus almost like becoming like the main character of your own story, right?
Absolutely. I like to use the metaphor of an invisible fence. You know, if you have a pet like a dog, you can create an invisible fence, which means you start with an electric fence, and the dog, if it gets to that edge, it gets a little bit of a shock when it touches it. After a while, the dog stops touching the fence. So then you can turn the electricity off, and the dog still won't walk up to the fence because it doesn't want to get shocked.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, you can actually take the fence down so that the dog doesn't even see a fence, but it still won't walk past that perimeter. And so in some ways, we're all a little bit like, trained animals that have lots of invisible fences that we've learned not to cross that boundary. And what often happens when we wake up is we cross one boundary that we thought was uncrossable. We move past one impasse. We do something we didn't think was possible. We experience something we didn't think was possible once. And then even if it's a little thing, you cross that, and then you start to wonder, how many of these other boundaries might be invisible? Maybe there's nothing that is actually holding me down. Maybe these are all invisible fences and I can go anywhere. And when you when you realize that you don't know what the boundaries are, right? That's awakening, is a sense that you don't know what's possible.
Yeah.
And sometimes people will talk about anything's possible as if everything is possible, but that's not true. Everything's not possible. There are some things that are not possible. I can't have lunch in Paris in an hour. It's just not possible, right? But when you don't know what's possible authentically, you have the feeling that anything is possible, because you don't really know what the edges are. And that's, when you start to experience that, an ordinary life doesn't really feel like it's going to cut it anymore.
Yeah.
Because suddenly you want to find out what the real edges are. You want to find out how far you can go.
Yeah. That's so true. We can go pretty far.
Yeah.
We can go definitely a lot further than we've been told. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
So what would you say is the reason for this search within people, this the search to go far, the search to dissolve the boundaries of what we've been told? Is it just like mere play, mere curiosity on someone's part, or is there a certain alignment that somebody can reach in this? Like, is there a kind of orientation in one's being that comes from this search? You know what I'm getting at?
I think so. Let me try something and we'll see. I love to study mystical philosophies and ideas. And, if you look at various traditions, whether they be, more traditional traditions or esoteric traditions, you see a lot of similarities, what they call the perennial wisdom. And to me, creation at its source is a kind of energetic, pure potential. It's pure possibility before anything exists yet. It's the possibility for anything to exist. And you could call that energy, you can call it a lot of things, but I think that's what people call God. That's what they call the divine. That's what they call, I don't know, the life force, universal, whatever words are useful to you. It's the source. It's where everything came from, is coming from right now. And there appears to be an impulse towards manifesting all of those possibilities. If you kind of look at the natural world, you think, well, what's going on here? Well, growth really is going on. It seems like growth is part of the inherent order of reality. Everything's always growing. Everything's always getting bigger. Everything's always realizing more and more of its form and its potential. And I feel like humans are the same way. Innate in us is a desire to manifest our full potential, right? I mean, if you almost anybody that thinks about it, can relate to the idea that they want to manifest their full potential. It's like you want to take this human vehicle for a test drive. Let's see what it can do. How far can it go? How high? How fast can it drive? What can I do in this form? But then, human beings get beaten down by life, by circumstances, by ideas about what's not possible. And we can end up being resigned to being much less. We have big ideas when we're younger. And then part of what we call the maturing process is limiting our expectations, to quote unquote match reality. But I think we all feel a bit suffocated fundamentally because somewhere we know that there's much, like you were saying earlier, there's much more possible for us than what we've been told. And that's not just us. That impulse in you or in me to realize our full potential is not just a personal impulse that Jeff has or Gary has. It's a universal impulse, which is what's kind of propagating through the whole of reality, is a desire to manifest and realize all potentials. And so I think that's where, that's why it's why it's not, as you said, it's not completely random. It's not just doing it for the hell of it. It's also doing it because you want to expand into your fullness. And I think everybody can relate to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well said. Yeah, that was good. So it's like, going off of that note, I guess what I was getting at, it's like, yeah, it's not fully like we want to expand at first, right? Like there's this sort of sense of innate expansiveness in one could say is the spiritual search, right? We want to figure out what it is that we are, what all this is, who am I, what is really going on here, right? It's a sort of, it's a search. But I guess what I was getting at is like, does it eventually come to a sense of contraction, like a sense of unique expression within one's humanly vessel, right? So it's still like from that expansiveness, we found out what we are and what we're not. And then the search kind of, I wouldn't say it ends, but it gets a little bit more precise, a little bit more, what your dharma is, I guess you could say. So from that expansiveness and realizing what you are, you manifest in your own dharma, in your own way, in your own karma, as the perfect expression of God, but also in your own separate form. You know what I'm getting at? So it's like at first it seems like this grand spiritual expansion, and then eventually it seems like the search doesn't necessarily end, but it contracts into a very more perfected form. Yeah, yeah. Did that
I
make
think
sense?
that totally makes sense. And I would only want to add that I think the path can be different for different people. So there do seem to be great realizers who it seemed like their destiny in this life was to just expand and remain in this expansive state indefinitely. You could argue that is their manifestation. So,
Yeah.
we'd be getting in a fine point, but just with that caveat of, I do think everyone's path is unique. What you're talking about essentially is in terms of your, very particular, unique expression of that expansion. In the way that I teach, I call that the artistry of possibility. I like that. And I talk about the fact that it seems that not everyone necessarily, but many of us, certainly me, as you go and experience the non-ordinary expansion of your being, you also feel compelled to bring that back into manifest expression through your own vehicle through in your own life in your own particular way. Uh, in my case, that involves a lot of writing of books, a lot of teaching, some art, just various ways that I want to be able to express these non-ordinary possibilities. And I see that in people all over the place, that there's a desire to act as an artist of possibility, which means you experience possibilities that aren't manifest yet. You see things that don't exist yet. You experience things that aren't in the ordinary world available, and you want to make them available. You want to create that possibility in manifestation. There's a great essay by a Christian mystic named Evelyn Underhill. It's from about 100 years ago, and it's called "The Mystic as Creative Artist." And I republished it as a small book, but it's all about the various ways in some of the mystical traditions that some of the great realizers have endeavored to bring back the breadcrumbs of their experience in order to create essentially a map or a trail that others could follow to find those same states. So I love that essay, and it's always been my interest. So I have a friend and colleague. His name is Jeffrey Kripal. He's at Rice University. He'd probably be a great guest for you someday. He studies mystical states and paranormal experiences from the perspective of being a religious scholar. And a lot of what he talks about, which really resonates with me, is that mystical experiences and paranormal experiences, they aren't just experiences that a person has. They are sort of higher dimensional possibilities that are calling themselves into existence. They're sort of looking for someone sensitive enough to hear them, see them, perceive them, in order to invite the possibility of being brought, into deeper manifestation in whatever form the person and that experience, that higher dimensional being, are kind of working together to bring those possibilities into manifestation on Earth.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. It's almost like they're a life form.
Exactly, like a higher order life form that wants to invite manifestation.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty powerful. Wow.
The way that I think about it, and these are things I haven't really written about this except in my fiction works, and in an upcoming book called "The Soul's Journey to Wholeness." But as I see it, there's that infinite potential, which is the original source, and that is the divine, that is God, that is heaven. Whatever, that's nirvana. That's that extreme. And from that, the kind of three-dimensional ordinary earth plane has become manifest and is being manifest in every moment. And we have the opportunity through this artistry of possibility, by exploring higher realms, the realms between earth and that, absolute place, and encountering the possibilities there, encountering the higher energetic forms of life that exist there. We have the possibility to begin to manifest those in this realm, so that we can bring this realm closer to, that's what I think it means to bring earth to heaven.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I had this strange realization, visualization when you were describing that. It's like we're it's like two different timelines coalescing to merge into one. It's like,
Hmm.
yeah, I pictured like time in a way in one side, even though this is obviously it's not, this is just a metaphor, but
Sure.
in my head it was like time going one way and then us going the other, and we come and meet at this like omega point, you know, we can meet
Yes.
at the middle, but that's through our creativity. Wow.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's like we're still writing the book here. We're still writing the story. We're still building heaven in a way.
Exactly. So,
Mm.
have you heard of the French theologian Teilhard de Chardin?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay, so Teilhard de Chardin spoke about the omega point. This is what made me think about it because you just used the term.
Mm-hmm.
So he had a spiritual view very similar to what I just laid out. That there's this infinite possibility, which is God, and then there's us through our creative acts. We are evolving, developing, growing toward that omega point, all heading to some final union,
Yeah.
which he called the omega point. It's the final ending where the pure possibility that was there at the beginning is completely met in manifestation by the manifestation of everything. Um,
Wow. Yeah. That's the transcendental object at the end of time, as
yeah,
it kind of says.
that's right.
Oh, wow. And the thing is, do you think that possibility is ever reached? You know, is this actually ever boom, it's there? Or is it more so just like something in our being that we reach, like something in our hearts, in our souls that we feel as though is a possibility, but maybe it's like it's an infinite possibility. That it's an eternal possibility. And maybe that's what one can mean by eternal life. Like maybe that's what one can mean by like having this sense of immortality. It's like it's almost like a perspective shift. It's a different way to view yourself in your creativity, and that's where immortality comes from. It's like a you shift the lens by seeing this omega point not as this external idea but as some kind of internal dwelling, you
Yeah,
know.
no, I like that, and I would agree with you. I don't see that final culminating omega point as something that could actually happen because, uh, as another American philosopher, Charles Sanders Peirce, said in his philosophy, every time we manifest a new possibility, that manifestation creates new possibilities that didn't
Yeah.
exist before. So before we had, say, the computer, once we developed the computer, we then developed a whole range of possibilities that couldn't exist until there was a computer.
Yeah.
So you never reach the end point because every step you take in terms of manifesting, you push the end point further off. And so it's an infinite journey. And I think the place of solace within ourselves is the place where we recognize that we are on that journey, that we are moving in that, that's as a human being, that's as good as it gets. You're heading in the right direction, and then you just go and you go as far as you can in this lifetime, and maybe you pick it up in the next lifetime, and who knows how it works.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. It's kind of like the way, the Tao, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Definitely.
That's some powerful stuff, man. Yeah, it's like we touch upon this current that transcends the um the comings and goings. It
Right.
transcends the impermanence, the seeming impermanence of all of the phenomena in our life. It's some kind of current of eternal creativity. It's this eternal novelty, and from that novelty springs even more novelty. It's quite beautiful.
That's right. So it's you're saying fantastic things. Charles Sanders Peirce is an American philosopher, very little known. He was an inspiration to Teilhard de Chardin, but he wanted to think about, okay, what is the universe actually made of, right?
Hmm.
Because and he looked at Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher, and he said, and Kant had all these categories. Reality is made up of time and space and causality, and I think there were 12 of them. And Peirce said, well, I don't think so, because I think all of those evolved. I think time evolved. I think space evolved. I don't think the universe didn't start with time. It didn't start with space. And he would imagine things like, at the beginning, every moment was a completely random moment. And then eventually 2 moments that were sequential showed up one after the other, and twice as much could happen in that. And so it had a survival advantage. So then there were more of those. And then eventually there was a 4. And now so much evolution has happened is we only ever see sequential moments. Only very occasionally do we experience a non-sequential moment.
Mm-hmm.
Some moment where you get popped out and you go, oh, that was weird.
Mm-hmm.
So in thinking about it, he said, well, the only 2 things that had to be there at the beginning were novelty, and this is why this is what triggered it, because you were just using the word, were novelty and habit. Because there had to be the potential for new things to arise. Otherwise, nothing would happen.
Yep.
And there had to be the potential for those new things. There had to be a tendency toward them happening again, at least to some degree. Otherwise, it would just remain chaos forever. And he said, the universe had to be more or less an equal amount of novelty and habit, because if there was too much novelty, eventually things would spread out into chaos. And if there was too much habit, eventually everything would solidify into non-movement. It would just become bound. So those were the 2 fundamental principles that he imagined had to be there at the beginning.
That's good. Yeah, novelty and habit. That's how we reach a balance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, you could even take that into our own lives as well, into our personal lives.
You definitely can.
In order to reach that balance, you got to have a sense of novelty, but it's got to be controlled, because, like you said, it could be chaotic because really everything, if you really get down to the nitty and gritty, everything is novel. Every single moment of our lives is novel.
Absolutely.
So it has to be kind of, it has to be constricted a little bit with our habit, or at least the mindset of habit or ritual or patterns, right? That's how the mind works. So I can see that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Wow. Oh man, I don't even know where to go from here.
Well, let me share something else with you. Another French scholar. His name is Henri Corbin, and he is the person who coined the phrase "the imaginal realm." And he was a scholar of the Islamic mystical tradition. And one of the points that he made that really struck me was, he said, before the Age of Enlightenment, so the Age of Enlightenment is the age of reason, it's the dawning of the scientific worldview, it's the last 300-400 years. Before that, in the religious traditions of the West, because we're speaking about Western history, the religious traditions of the West, be it Christian, Jewish, or Islamic, a lot of what they were concerned about were heavenly realms. The heavenly realms of angels and all the things that happened there, and how the angels would protect you and guide you, and how at the far end of heaven is where you found God. And there was a lot of you had the Divine Comedy, Dante's great poem about all the various realms. It's what people were, and religious scholars of the time, that's what they were preoccupied with, is how do we navigate through these higher realms? In the Enlightenment, those higher realms became very woo-woo feeling. Like, what does this mean? Angels, because a lot of the imagery is a bit hard to swallow. And so what Corbin was saying is that from the age of the Enlightenment on, most of the religious traditions, they largely did away with all the middle realms. They talked about God and the absolute and that extreme unknowable mystery. And they talked about life on earth and, being good and being aligned with that. but there wasn't much talk of the in between. And in his uh, studies, he was saying, no, these realms. If you look back at the great literature that he was reading from the Islamic tradition, these realms were considered to be real realms, real places that you could visit, not in your material form, but in a higher internal form. And he said, what you realize by visiting these realms, and I can really relate to that. I mean, I got so excited when I started reading him a few years ago, is you go inside into these spiritual realms, and you let go of the habit of seeing yourself as only a material being, and you find a way to cross over and to begin to experience deeper dimensions of who you are. And if you go in far enough, you start to realize that the spiritual realms that you encounter aren't on the inside of that the physical body is actually on the inside of those spiritual realms. That we have it a bit backwards because we're so identified with the meat, with the physical. But when you start to experience the higher dimensions of yourself, you realize that there's an inner universe, which is actually what surrounds the material. The material is emerging inside the spiritual, not the other way around.
Yeah. So would you say in that way, the body is almost like a membrane for these realms, almost like the energy of these realms passes through us or doesn't pass through us, and we just have to be susceptible enough to, I guess, be like the transmitter of these realms?
I would say yes. I wouldn't want to limit it to the brain. I'm sure the brain plays a part in it, but it's us. We're the transmitter, not us, just the body, but whatever you are, whatever I am, right? That there's an individual sense of being. In the Hindu tradition, they would talk about it as Atman. It's the deepest sense of self that exists. That is somehow like it's like a radio that can tune in to certain frequencies. And we are habitually tuned in to the frequencies of just this normal world. When we do spiritual work, we start tuning in to dimensions beyond this one, to possibilities beyond this one. And as we tune that dial, we discover things, and then we start to, we can tune it further out and further out, further out. And then if you're lucky, you find people who can mutually tune. And you can start to meet in other places that are beyond this one. And you start to realize, wow, this is a really big and mysterious reality. Whatever this is much bigger than just the surface of one planet.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I like the point of mutually tuning. I feel as though there's power in numbers in that way. If you have a group that's linked up to the same wavelength, there's a certain power in the resonance, in the transmission. If the people are truly all on the same wavelength, there's a power in that.
And there's satellite arrays. So if you take 50-meter wide satellite dish, and you put a whole bunch of them in a field, and the field is like 2 miles round, you end up with the effective power of a 2-mile wide radio dish in terms of what it can pick up from space. You could never build a 2-mile wide radio. There would be no way to hold the material up. But you can essentially create the same effect with a lot of small ones. And that's what I feel in groups. Like I said, I was just on this retreat. When you're on retreat for days and you're working to tune in to the same frequency, you can pull down, much higher dimensions of reality than you would have the power to on your own. There's places we can go together that you can't go on your own.
Yeah. I feel as though that is exemplified using mantra or kirtan. There's something very special about that. The transmission of sound or through sound using sound with people, you can really feel it. You know, anyone can attest to that, I think, that has experienced kirtan for an extended amount of time with a, you know, a decent amount of people. There's something so powerful about the transmission of kirtan, and specifically Sanskrit, that I think is really, it touches upon that transmission somehow. I'm not going to even try to explain how it happens, but I think there's a certain kind of transmission through the vibration of the word that is very poignant and efficient, I guess you could say.
Definitely. And, there's something deeply powerful about experiencing, like a chanting,
Yeah.
a spiritual chanting in a group of people, and especially if it's a larger group of people, and you hit a flow where initially it's a group of people chanting individually together, and eventually it's a chanting through a group,
Yeah.
uh, and
Yeah.
you feel moved by the mantra more than you feel like you're producing it.
Yeah, you like become the mantra.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like you lose yourself in the vibration of the music. It's
Yes.
very powerful. And then also, I think, you know, from that, I think ideally the community takes that connection outside of the mantra. I think it's almost like that is to establish the kind of connection and transmission. And then I think from that experience, that very powerful connection that someone has experienced, you take that out into the world, and you take that resonance into one's life. You know, it's almost like that's the establishment of the connection. It's through sound, and you get maybe possibly some kind of downloads through the vibration. But then I think also what we do is we create from that transmission.
Mm. Yes.
Yeah.
And the way I like to speak about that, whether it be in terms of chanting and mantra, or even, other types of practice, meditation, but there are times when you're doing a practice like chanting, mantra, meditation, and you might be doing that alone, or you might be doing it in groups. To me, it's always more powerful in groups, no matter what it is. Even if you're sitting in silent meditation, it's more powerful to do it in a group. But when you're doing that practice, I always suggest to people that you just give yourself to it.
Yeah.
Give yourself to it 100%. Just go with it as far as you can go. No concern about bringing anything back or what you might. Don't even worry about having insights or seeing insights. Just go. Just disappear. Be one with the chanting to the extent that you forget yourself completely. I always encourage people to go so far into their practice that they experience self-forgetting. So you stop being aware even of yourself doing it. It's just the doing is happening. And that depth of surrender to the practice, it changes you. It transforms you. And so then when the practice is done, like you were saying, you go back out into the world. And I always tell people, don't try to do anything different. Don't try to be different because you did this practice, but just notice how you are different. Notice how in some situation where you always did A, you see yourself doing B. And you're not doing B because you're behavior modifying yourself and going, oh, I always do A, so now I'll do B. You just spontaneously did B when you usually always did A, and when that you start to see that in your own experience, you're really seeing the transformative fruits of your practice, that it's changing you in deep ways far below your intellect.
Yeah. Well said. That's so true. That's so true. With a sense of surrender, I think this is kind of what I was trying to touch upon at the beginning. With a sense of surrender to this divine force, it does seem like what comes about is a effortless changing in how we respond to the world. It's almost like we go from reaction to response, right? But it's a response that is just without there is discernment. Like there is a certain discrimination that comes in it, but it's without, like I said, it's effortless. It's like without any kind of resistance. There is in that choosing between A and B, that other choice, it seems like just becomes more natural and more fluid. Like there is more just like going with the flow, one may say.
Right.
And I think that is what it's really all about. It's a transmutation of energy to truly transform how we act with each other, essentially to become more loving and compassionate, to really to simplify it, right? It's to become a more, I guess, a better person. If you really want to say it in one way, it's a better person to yourself and to the world at large.
Right. I know. I think that's definitely true. And it's a good analogy to think about people who gain mastery in just about anything, but if you think about say a master chef, so this person is a true master. They are seeing things differently, right? You could show them, an ingredient and a spice,
Mm.
and by the way it feels, by the way it smells, by the way it tastes, it's giving them all kinds of information that me, as just a non-master chef, coriander is coriander to me, but I'm sure to a master chef, there's infinite gradations of quality there, and so they're able to respond by, say, choosing the best spice for their dish. But it's not something they're not deducing that. It's not something that they're having to figure out.
Yeah.
It's because they've developed a sensitivity that allows them to respond with more refinement to reality. And spiritual people, spiritual masters, the same way. They've developed a sensitivity to these deeper currents of existence that allows them to respond in ways that often look more compassionate, more loving, more generous, less self-centered. But they're not doing it on purpose. They're not thinking I should do that.
Yeah.
It's become a natural, spontaneous response that's coming out of the deepening of sensitivity that they've embody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There seems to be a general consensus of becoming more compassionate and loving. Once one becomes more mastered in the human experience, right?
Right.
There seems to be some kind of obligation to be more loving, right? You don't have to be, but there seems like in the surrender to the flow, when you surrender to this flow, you surrender to other people, I guess you could say, or the situations. And it's not necessarily like a sort of passiveness. One can think it's passiveness and surrender. It's not like that at all. It's more so of like you said, how the master chef sees things differently. They see the ingredients differently in food. Well, I guess once one becomes more mastered within themselves, I see you differently, and I see
Absolutely.
everybody else differently. And what it really is I see a little bit of me in you or in anybody else, in the listener, whoever. I see being a mastered human being, very generally speaking, I feel as though it's like seeing or feeling intuitively the connection between my seeming separation and your seeming separation, and finding a coalescence between the two.
I think you're absolutely perfectly right on that's what happens in spiritual development to your human self is you see everything differently, but certainly other people. You start to see everything's emanating from the same source.
Yeah.
Which is why in the yogic tradition they say namaste, which is that in me that's the same in you. I'm honoring that, because what's looking through my eyes is exactly the same as what's looking through your eyes. There isn't me over here and you over there. There's one energy that's passing through two different identities.
Mm-hmm.
But, fundamentally, and if you think about it, we are exactly the same. So you're a person who has a name and you have a history, you have ideas, you have thought, you all kinds of things that are different. And I'm a person, I have a name, blah, blah, everything's different. But we're both fundamentally a person with a name and an identity and a history with thoughts and ideas. We're actually exactly identical.
Mm-hmm.
And spiritual practice makes you see what's the same in us more than you see what's different.
Yeah.
There certainly are differences, But you start to see that beyond those differences, there are things that connect us, that it becomes natural. Like loving doesn't feel loving. It just feels obvious. You
Yeah.
know, of course I'm going to do X, Y, and Z because that person's exactly me. I know exactly how they feel
Mm,
because that's me over there. And that's how I would feel. Where the more that, as you said, you're embedded in ideas of separation, it's you over here and that person over there, and they have nothing to do with you. And basically, you don't care.
yeah.
And you can't even really empathize. You know, so
Hmm.
you just aren't aware. And of course, we all exist somewhere between those extremes. Um,
Yeah.
generally,
Yeah. It's always both. Because the thing is, I feel like you could also not empathize and not care once one gets trapped into the idea of, well, we're all the same. You know, the trap of the identity of no identity, I guess you could say. I feel like true non-duality is playing both parts, is knowing that really deep down I'm you, you're me, but yet there is this beautiful dance between the different ways that we express our
hmm
differences. And as long as we don't get lost in our differences and we don't get lost in the sameness, that's what a human being I feel as though is like. That is the way. That's the yin and the yang. It's it's both and neither, you know?
right. No, I think you're absolutely right. And the great opportunity is to, dance beautifully
Yeah.
between the universal and the particular aspects of reality, and knowing that they're both real
Mm-hmm.
and they're both equally real. It's not that the universal is more real than the particular. They're both real. It's just the particular is the one we've been conditioned to see more easily.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit, it takes effort on our part to expand into the universal. That doesn't make it more true. It just makes it less familiar.
Hmm. I like that. That's good. Yeah. Hmm.
Because that's where you get into difficulties, when you start to feel that the universal is somehow really real and the
Hmm.
particular isn't really real. And therefore you can do things against yourself or against other people and somehow feel like it's the right thing because you're taking a stand for what's universal, what's beyond. And it doesn't make any sense in terms of non-duality, because of course non-duality means not two, which means there can't be, in the end, the universal and the particular can't be two.
Yeah.
Right. So nothing, there can't be two. So that's why in the Hindu tradition, they say in the end, Brahman, which is universal source, and Atman, which is the particular individual, are one. Uh,
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. The two are one.
and
Mm.
that's important to, yeah, that's important to realize, because we need to love the whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
not just God.
Yep. Yeah. Love the layers of God as well.
Absolutely.
The waves and the ocean.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just it's a paradox at the end of the day. It's a paradox, and we're trying to speak about it. So when you try to speak about it, it gets a little tricky because automatically we're put into a subject object orientation.
That's right.
Literally, there's two of us here,
Hmm.
going back and forth.
Right.
But I think with a keen eye, one can come to realize like we said, the two is one, or the two are one.
Absolutely. And that's always a tricky thing about language,
Mm-hmm.
because as you said, our language is inherently created from, a subject object orientation.
Yeah.
Um, that's basically the way it's built. It's created by the consciousness of separation, which is the dominant consciousness. So often when you're writing, because I do a lot of writing, when you're writing about mystical things and about higher realizations and non-duality, you have to use language in a bit of a poetic way,
Mm,
somewhat metaphorical. You can't describe those things precisely. You just have to use words to gesture people in a direction where they could look to see it for themselves.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's no way to describe those higher realities precisely in words,
Mm-hmm.
because they don't exist. They can't exist in words. they exist in people's experience. So that's
Yeah.
where people need to find them.
Hmm. Yeah, that's the classic finger pointing at the moon analogy. So make sure
Absolutely.
you don't mistake the finger for the moon or the
That's
words
right.
for what the words are symbolizing.
Exactly. And that's why some people, just choose not to say anything.
Honestly,
uh,
yeah, I understand that. I can see
yeah.
that.
There's wisdom in that choice.
Mm.
Definitely. It's just not my choice. I feel compelled to write. So I do the best I can with words because that's the tool I have.
Well, I think you're doing a pretty good job, man.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Um, Honestly, on that note, I think we can probably start to wrap this thing up. Um, do you have anything you'd like to say? Any other words you'd like to use?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Gary, it's been great to meet you. And it's
You as
really
well.
been fun. You've given me the opportunity to speak about things publicly that I don't often speak about. You know. So
Well,
so
I'm
that's
honored.
well, I am too. I'm honored you gave me the opportunity. I love what I'm doing. I love these higher possibilities. I'm amazed at how much wisdom already exists in the human canon, that
Mm,
you can find in all different forms. Uh, I honor and am absolutely awed by the infinite number of paths to the divine. And I'm having a fantastic time helping as many people who find me uh,
mm,
as come to me, and with the desire in the end for me is to bring people together in a stabilized, higher state of consciousness. To I like to talk about, there's whatever is the next highest possibility in consciousness. I want to create a base camp there that can
mm.
then become the ground for going further.
Wow, I like that. I like
Yeah, it's
that.
fun.
Inspirational. And like you said, it's fun. That's all. That's all that really matters, man. As long as you're really truly enjoying the journey here. The cliche, the journey is the destination, right?
That's right. Well, you can imagine, like, from the divine's point of view, since she wants us to find her, right? Assuming she does, then she would make spiritual work fun.
Yeah,
Otherwise, people won't do it. So,
that's very true. Yeah, right.
she's clever that way.
Yeah. You gotta enjoy the process, man. I think that's what this whole thing is about too. Is like the path is really about enjoying life, right?
Yes,
To the greatest extent that we can, right? I think we're supposed to enjoy it here. We're supposed to have a little bit of sense of play and wonder at this thing that we're in, right? I guess transcend the suffering in a certain way. Um, yeah, I think
I
that's what it's really
agree.
about, man. So
I
keep on keeping on.
Well, thank you, and you too. You're doing great work with your interviews and your podcasts,
Appreciate that.
spreading important information. So, thank you so much again for this opportunity.
Thank you. Yeah. Appreciate your time, effort, and wisdom that you brought to this conversation. Appreciate anybody that listened this long. And yeah, let's keep on keeping on.
Let's keep doing it. All right. Thanks,
Uh,
Gary.
Thanks, Jeff. Have a
Bye
good one,
bye.
man.